Egypt was collapsing. Foreign rulers controlled its lands, its temples were silent, and its people had lost all hope. But in this darkness, a new force was preparing to rise.
The kingdom that once ruled the world now stood broken. Its walls were shattered, its kings defeated, and its future uncertain. Egypt needed a savior before it was too late.
The Hyksos brought weapons Egypt had never seen. Their chariots ruled the north and their armies crushed every resistance. For almost a century, Egypt lived under their shadow. When Egypt finally fought back, its kings paid the ultimate price. Sekrenenre Tau fell in battle, and his death marked the darkest moment in Egyptian history.
But a young prince watched everything unfold. He witnessed loss, destruction, and defeat. And it was in this moment that his destiny began to form.
In secret rooms beneath Thebes, priests whispered of prophecy. A leader who would rise when Egypt was at its weakest. A king born to restore the two lands. King.
They named him Ahmose, born of the moon. No one yet knew that this child would one day free Egypt from foreign rule and change history forever. As he grew, Ahmose trained harder than any prince before him. He learned discipline, strength, and the art of war, preparing for battles he could not yet imagine.
Meanwhile, the Hyksos strengthened their rule. Their kings planned new attacks, tightening their grip on Egypt with every passing year.
For the people of Egypt, life became harsh. Food was taken, temples were controlled, and hope faded. But in their hearts, they waited for liberation.
Moses' brother Ahmose rose first, launching bold attacks against the Hyksos. His victories reignited hope, proving that Egypt was not powerless.
Ahmose fell before the war was won. His death struck Egypt again, leaving the throne and the fight for freedom without a leader.
And so, a young Ahmose, barely old enough to rule, stepped forward. The weight of an entire civilization now rested on his shoulders.
He studied his enemy, their chariots, their weapons, their tactics. Ahmose understood that to defeat the Hyksos, he had to learn their strengths.
Under his command, Egypt transformed. Stronger weapons were forged, new armies were trained, and a nation once broken prepared to rise again. A storm was rising over Egypt, one that would sweep away the old world and bring a new era of strength, power, and destiny.
As Ahmose trained, Egypt prepared with him. Soldiers gathered, boats were armed, and the Nile became the pathway toward liberation.
The people rallied behind him. Farmers, warriors, nobles, and priests, all united under one purpose: to reclaim their homeland.
The first strike would echo across the sands, and that single moment would begin the war that would change Egypt forever.
His name would be remembered for thousands of years. Ahmose, the liberator, the warrior king, the founder of Egypt's new kingdom.
In the heart of ancient Egypt, during a time of chaos and foreign rule, a young prince was born who would one day rise to change the fate of a civilization. His name was Ahmose, meaning born of the moon. But his destiny reached far beyond the sky. It would shape the future of Egypt for centuries. Before Ahmose came of age, Egypt was a divided land. The northern region had been taken over by outsiders known as the Hyksos, warriors who arrived with powerful horses, chariots, and new weapons Egypt had never seen before. They ruled the rich lands of the delta, while Egyptian pharaohs held only the southern kingdom, weakened and struggling. Too many Egyptians. This was a time of humiliation. Their proud civilization, once the strongest on earth, was forced to pay tribute to foreign rulers. Cities fell, temples were burned, and ancient traditions seemed to fade under the shadow of the Hyksos. But in the royal family of Thebes, hope remained alive. Prince Ahmose grew up hearing stories of resistance, stories of his father, Seqenenre, who fought bravely to push the Hyksos back, stories of his brother, Ahmose, who continued the struggle but died before victory was possible, and stories of a land waiting for a leader strong enough to unite Egypt again. Ahmose spent his youth training for war, studying strategy, and learning the history of the kingdom he hoped to reclaim. He listened to generals, priests, and elders. He watched how the Hyksos fought, studied their weapons, and prepared for the day he would face them. When Ahmose was still a teenager, tragedy struck. His father was killed in battle. His brother died soon after. The responsibility of saving Egypt, of ending foreign rule, fell to a boy not yet fully grown. But Ahmose did not retreat. He did not hesitate. He rose. Young Ahmose gathered warriors from every corner of southern Egypt. He rebuilt armies that had fallen apart. He trained soldiers in new tactics. He strengthened alliances with Nubia and secured vital resources needed for war. The time had come to reclaim Egypt. With determination far greater than his age, Ahmose led his forces north, marching toward the Hyksos' stronghold. His mission was bold, dangerous, and nearly impossible, but it would become one of the greatest turning points in Egyptian history. This is the story of how a young prince became the founder of the new kingdom, the era of Egypt's greatest power. The story of how Ahmose unified a divided land, drove out foreign rulers, restored Egyptian pride, and opened the door to centuries of pharaohs: Thutmose, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and Ramesses. This is the beginning of a legend. Ahmose I, the pharaoh who saved Egypt. Long before Ahmose was born, Egypt stood as one of the greatest civilizations on earth. Its temples rose toward the sky. Its pharaohs ruled with absolute power, and its people believed they were protected by the gods themselves. For centuries, Egypt's borders were strong, its armies respected, and its culture unmatched. But this golden age did not last forever. Slowly, signs of weakness began to appear. Rival nobles fought for influence. Some leaders grew lazy, others corrupt. And the unity that had once held the kingdom together started to crack. While Egypt argued within itself, a new threat was already approaching from the northeast. These newcomers were the Hyksos, a group of foreign settlers and warriors who arrived from Western Asia. At first, they came peacefully, trading goods and sharing new tools. But as Egypt struggled with internal divisions, the Hyksos grew stronger. They brought with them powerful technologies the Egyptians had never seen before: fast horses, deadly bronze weapons, and the most revolutionary tool of war, the horse-drawn chariot. Egypt's armies were not prepared. One by one, northern cities fell under Hyksos' rule. Their capital, Avaris, rose as a strong fortress in the delta. The Egyptians called them Hyksos, meaning rulers of foreign lands. The Hyksos were not simply visitors anymore. They were kings. In the south, at Thebes, Egyptian pharaohs still ruled, but their power was limited. They were forced to pay tribute to the Hyksos, offering gold, grain, and cattle. Egypt, the proud land of the pyramids, now lived under the shadow of foreign rule. For nearly a century, daily life changed. Foreign customs mixed with Egyptian traditions. Merchants traveled cautiously. Soldiers felt humiliated. Priests feared the old gods were angered. And the people of Egypt waited for a leader strong enough to restore their dignity. The lands between Thebes and Avaris were filled with tension. Messengers carried warnings of new Hyksos raids. Farmers whispered stories of brutality. The wealth of Egypt was flowing northward into the hands of rulers who were not Egyptian. Many believed the kingdom was on the edge of collapse. But in the royal palace of Thebes, resistance never fully disappeared. Pharaoh Seqenenre, father of Ahmose, knew Egypt could not survive like this forever. He led rebellions, small at first, and then larger. His courage inspired hope, but it also brought danger. The fight to free Egypt would cost him his life. After Seqenenre's death, Ahmose's older brother continued the war. He won victories, reclaimed territory, and shook the power of the Hyksos. But he too would die before Egypt could be fully liberated. And so the responsibility, the hope, and the burden of restoring Egypt fell to a boy who was still growing into his strength. Ahmose inherited not just a throne, but a mission shaped by generations of sacrifice. The land he would one day rule was wounded, divided, and exhausted, but it was not defeated. Egypt still held the memory of greatness, the pride of its ancestors, and the desire to reclaim its place as a mighty kingdom. In this world full of danger and uncertainty, a young prince prepared to rise. The world before Ahmose was shaped by failure and loss, but the world after him would be shaped by courage, determination, and the unstoppable force of a leader who refused to surrender. This is the Egypt Ahmose was born into, a land waiting for a savior, a land preparing for rebirth, a land ready to be led into a new era of power, hope, and glory. Before Ahmose could rise as a savior of Egypt, the world had to understand the power he was up against. The Hyksos were not simple invaders. They were skilled warriors, strategic leaders, and a people who brought new ideas that reshaped the course of Egyptian history. Their arrival began quietly. Small groups migrated into Egypt seeking fertile land, trade, and opportunity. At first, Egyptians welcomed them. They worked as farmers, merchants, and craftsmen. They blended into Egyptian society. But as Egypt weakened from internal conflict, the Hyksos grew stronger, more organized, and more ambitious. They came from regions of the Near East, and they carried knowledge Egypt had never seen before. They understood the techniques of chariot warfare. They mastered bronze weapons sharper than anything Egyptian blacksmiths could produce. They trained skilled archers who could shoot at full speed from horseback. These tools of war gave them an advantage Egypt was not prepared for. While Egyptian nobles argued over land and pride, the Hyksos built alliances, while Egyptian armies remained scattered. The Hyksos trained and expanded, and while Egypt hesitated, the Hyksos struck. City after city fell. Memphis, one of the most important cities in Lower Egypt, collapsed under their power. With each victory, the Hyksos claimed more land and richer resources. Their new kingdom, centered in the city of Avaris, became a fortress of innovation and military might. Their kings wore the double crown and declared themselves rulers of Egypt. For nearly a century, they controlled the north. They allowed some Egyptian customs to remain, but their rule was firm and often ruthless. Egyptian people paid heavy taxes. Trade was tightly controlled. Soldiers in the north were forced to abandon their loyalty to Egyptian pharaohs and serve Hyksos rulers instead. Yet, the Hyksos were not monsters, they were strategic leaders. They built strong cities, improved agriculture, and strengthened trade networks. They brought fresh technologies into Egypt, including the composite bow, new metalworking styles, and advanced fortification methods. In many ways, Egypt grew more advanced because of them, but it also grew less free. The southern Egyptians in Thebes watched their homeland slip away. They saw foreign kings sitting on the throne that once belonged to pharaohs, chosen by the gods. Anger grew in the hearts of the people. Pride turned into determination. The desire for liberation became stronger with every passing year. It was during this time that the royal family of Thebes emerged as the symbol of resistance. Seqenenre began the first rebellion, refusing to bow to the Hyksos. His courage inspired the people, but it also sealed his fate when his mummified body was discovered centuries later. Deep wounds on his skull told the story of a violent death proof that he fought bravely against the Hyksos until his last breath. His son Ahmose continued the struggle with fierce determination. He launched bold attacks into Hyksos territory and reclaimed much of southern Egypt. His victory shook Avaris and threatened Hyksos' control. But before the final blow could be struck, Ahmose died in battle, leaving Egypt once again without a leader. And so the torch of liberation passed to the youngest in the royal line, a boy named Ahmose. He inherited not only a kingdom under foreign rule, but a legacy of courage, sacrifice, and unfinished war. The Hyksos were powerful. Their weapons were superior. Their armies were experienced. Their stronghold was nearly impossible to penetrate. And Egypt had already lost to kings trying to defeat them. Yet, as the Hyksos rose to the height of their power, they did not see the force growing quietly in Thebes. They did not see the young prince training with determination. They did not see the future pharaoh preparing to change the destiny of Egypt forever. The rise of the Hyksos set the stage for one of the greatest liberation wars in ancient history. And from the ashes of occupation, a leader was about to rise. Who would reclaim Egypt and usher in a golden age? His name was Ahmose. Ahmose was born into a world shaped by danger, hope, and unfinished battles. From the moment he entered the royal palace of Thebes, his life was surrounded by stories of courage and sacrifice. He was the youngest son of a family determined to free Egypt from foreign rule, the last line of defense against the powerful. Hyksos, his father, Sekenenri was a brave and defiant pharaoh who had dared to challenge the Hyksos when others remained silent. Ahmose grew up hearing how his father refused to pay tribute, refused to bow, and refused to let Egypt's pride crumble. Sekenenri's courage inspired many Egyptians, but it also placed him directly in the path of danger. When Ahmose was still very young, tragedies struck. Sekenenri was killed in battle against the Hyksos. His death was brutal. His body, discovered thousands of years later, revealed deep cuts and crushing blows, as silent testimony to the violence of that war. For Ahmose, the loss of his father was more than personal. It was a reminder that the fight for Egypt's freedom demanded everything. The responsibility of resisting the Hyksos then fell to Ahmose's older brother, Prince Ahmose. Ahmose was strong, intelligent, and bold. He launched a campaign against the Hyksos with fearless determination. He reclaimed territories, destroyed Hyksos ships on the Nile, and pushed their armies closer to Avaris, weakening their grip on Egypt. Ahmose admired his brother deeply. He watched Ahmose train soldiers, command battles, and inspire loyalty. The young prince learned from every decision, every strategy, and every victory. He grew up surrounded by military leaders, strategists, and priests who believed Egypt's destiny was still alive. But fate was cruel once again. Before Ahmose could achieve final victory, he too was taken by war. His death left Egypt devastated, Thebes vulnerable, and the throne without an experienced ruler. Now, the duty to save Egypt fell to a boy who was barely old enough to carry a sword. Ahmose was young, but he was not unprepared. His childhood had been shaped by loss, discipline, and the constant presence of war. He had listened to generals discussing the weaknesses of the Hyksos. He had watched scribes record the history of Egypt's suffering. He had walked through the palace halls where his father and brother once trained, feeling the weight of their unfinished mission. The priests of Thebes believed Ahmose was chosen by the gods. The soldiers believed he carried the spirit of his ancestors. The people believed he was the last hope for freedom. As he stepped onto the throne, the weight of Egypt's future sat on his shoulders. He inherited an army that needed rebuilding, a kingdom that needed healing, and a war that needed finishing. But within him burned a fierce determination shaped by loss, strengthened by purpose, and guided by the legacy of fallen pharaohs. Ahmose spent his early reign studying the strategies of the Hyksos. He trained his soldiers harder, improved their weapons, and prepared them for the long and brutal campaign ahead. He listened to advisors, built alliances, and learned every weakness in the Hyksos' armor. The boy who once walked the palace corridors quietly was becoming a leader shaped by fire. He was no longer just a young prince. He was a warrior in the making. And soon, he would rise to fulfill the dream his father and brother had died for. The dream of taking Egypt back. When Ahmose took the throne, Egypt had been under Hyksos' rule for nearly a century. Generations had grown up knowing foreign kings, foreign weapons, and foreign authority. But Ahmose refused to accept this as Egypt's destiny. He believed the land of the Nile deserved freedom and he was prepared to fight for it. His first task was rebuilding the army. The years of conflict had weakened Egypt's forces. Many soldiers had lost confidence. Resources were low. Weapons were old. But Ahmose approached the challenge with determination. He ordered blacksmiths to forge stronger bronze axes and spears. He recruited young men from across Thebes and Nubia. He trained them in new combat formations, disciplined ranks that moved as one. Most importantly, Ahmose studied the Hyksos themselves. He learned how they fought. He learned how their chariots moved. He learned the design of their bows and the weaknesses of their armor. No Egyptian leader had ever studied the enemy with such patience and precision. Once the army was ready, Ahmose decided the time for waiting was over. The war to reclaim Egypt had begun. Ahmose marched north along the Nile with thousands of soldiers. The Hyksos expected a slow campaign, but the young pharaoh attacked with speed and aggression. He retook cities that had been under Hyksos' control. For decades, every victory inspired more Egyptians to join him. Villagers cheered and offered supplies as the army passed. The spirit of Egypt was awakening, but the Hyksos did not surrender easily. Their chariots, drawn by swift horses, crashed into Egyptian lines with deadly force. Their archers rained arrows from a distance, striking before swords could reach them for a moment. It seemed the enemies still held the advantage. Ahmose I responded by adapting. He ordered his craftsmen to build Egyptian chariots stronger, faster, more flexible. He trained new units of chariot archers, combining Egyptian discipline with Hyksos technology. It was a transformation that would change Egyptian warfare forever. The battles grew fiercer as Ahmose pushed closer to the Hyksos' capital of Avaris. Their fortified city was surrounded by strong walls and defended by battle-hardened warriors. Many believed it was impossible to defeat. But Ahmose was not fighting for glory. He was fighting for Egypt's soul. The young pharaoh launched a series of relentless attacks, cutting off Hyksos' supply routes, capturing their allies, and isolating Avaris. His army laid siege to the city. Day after day, Egyptian soldiers stormed. The walls fought on the riverbanks and broke through enemy lines. Arrows darkened the sky. The earth trembled with the sound of chariots. The Nile ran red with the cost of liberation. Still, Ahmose refused to retreat. Each night, he walked among his soldiers. He listened to their fears. He shared their meals. He honored their courage. His presence inspired loyalty so strong that warriors would follow him anywhere, even into the heart of Avaris. Soon, the constant pressure broke the Hyksos' resistance. Their defenses weakened, their supplies dwindled, their spirit faltered, and Ahmose, sensing the moment of destiny, prepared for the final assault. The attack was swift and brutal. Egyptian soldiers breached the walls, fighting street by street as flames rose behind them. Chariots thundered through narrow passages. Banners carrying the symbol of Thebes waved over the battlefield at last. After years of struggle, Avaris fell. For the first time in generations, Egypt stood free. The Hyksos survivors fled toward Canaan, chased relentlessly by Ahmose's army. He pursued them beyond Egypt's borders to ensure they would never return. With their defeat, the long nightmare of foreign rule ended. Egypt had been reclaimed. The land of the Nile belonged to its people once more. Ahmose did not simply win a war, he restored a civilization. And with Avaris destroyed, the foundations were laid for a new era of Egyptian power, wealth, and glory. The new kingdom was about to begin. The fall of Avaris was not a single battle, it was one of the most intense and defining sieges in all of ancient Egyptian history. The Hyksos stronghold was a massive fortress of mud brick walls, wooden towers, and fortified gates. It stood like a challenge, daring Egypt to reclaim its freedom. But Ahmose was determined. He knew this city was the heart of the Hyksos' power. If Avaris fell, foreign rule would end forever. Ahmose's army approached the city carefully. Thebes had never faced a fortress like this. The walls were thick, and enemy archers lined the battlements, ready to fire at anything that moved. Behind those walls were chariots, weapons, and soldiers who had ruled Egypt for nearly a century. They would not surrender easily, so Ahmose changed the rules of the war. He divided his forces into multiple groups and surrounded Avaris from every direction. No supplies could enter, and no reinforcements could escape. The siege began with constant pressure attacks by day, harassment by night. Egyptian soldiers built ramps and siege towers. Archers sent streams of arrows toward the gates. Warriors with axes and ropes tried to climb the walls. The Hyksos responded fiercely. Their arrows rained down from above. Their chariots charged out of hidden gates, striking quickly before retreating behind the fortress walls. They used fire, traps, and ambushes to defend their stronghold. Avaris became a battlefield of dust, flames, and echoing cries. Ahmose fought alongside his men. He rode through the lines on a chariot of his own, encouraging soldiers, commanding formations, and moving with confidence that inspired everyone around him. The young pharaoh understood that war was not won by strength alone, morale mattered, and his presence lit the fire of determination in every Egyptian heart. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, Avaris began to weaken. Food supplies ran low. Water became scarce. Panic spread among the Hyksos soldiers. Their allies abandoned them, and their hope began to fade. Ahmose seized the moment. He ordered a massive assault, one unlike anything Egypt had attempted before. Catapults launched burning projectiles into the city. Chariots crashed through weakened gates. Infantry stormed the walls, pushing forward with shields raised and spears ready. The clash was intense and unforgiving. Inside the city, Egyptian and Hyksos forces met in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Streets turned into battlegrounds. Houses caught fire. Smoke filled the air as both sides fought for control of Egypt's destiny. Ahmose's generals led waves of soldiers through narrow passages, tearing down barricades and overpowering defenders. Slowly, the tide shifted. Hyksos' resistance crumbled. Their once powerful chariots stood abandoned. Their commanders fell one by one. And as dawn broke over Avaris, the Egyptian flag after nearly a century rose over the fortress walls. Avaris had fallen. The occupation of Egypt was finally over. But Ahmose did not stop there. He knew that if the Hyksos escaped, they could regroup and return. So he pursued them relentlessly into the lands of Canaan. The chase was fierce. The Hyksos fled across deserts, abandoning their equipment and allies. But Ahmose's army pressed on. Every mile he marched was a message. Egypt would never again bow to foreign kings. At last, after defeating their final stronghold, the Hyksos were driven out completely. Their power was shattered. Their rule ended. Their memory became a warning to future generations. Ahmose returned to Egypt not as a young prince, but as a savior. Crowds filled the streets of Thebes, celebrating the pharaoh who had restored their pride. Priests thanked the gods for his victory. Soldiers saluted the leader who had fought beside them. Egypt was whole again, united under one crown. Ahmose had done what his father and brother could not. He freed Egypt. He reclaimed its strength. He restored its soul. And with the fall of Avaris, a new age of Egyptian greatness began, the age of empire, prosperity, monumental architecture, and powerful pharaohs. The new kingdom had risen, and Ahmose stood at its dawn. With the fall of Avaris and the expulsion of the Hyksos, Ahmose returned to a land wounded by decades of conflict. Egypt was free at last, but freedom alone was not enough. The long war had weakened farms, emptied granaries, damaged temples, and broken connections between cities. The kingdom he had regained needed healing. Ahmose understood that victory on the battlefield was only the beginning. To truly restore Egypt, he had to rebuild its foundations, its economy, its religion, its security, and its identity. He had to unite a people who had lived too long under fear. This was the task of a ruler, not just a warrior. His first priority was bringing the two lands together again. Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt had spent nearly a century under different rulers, with separate laws and different loyalties. Ahmose moved swiftly to re-establish strong central authority from Thebes. He placed trusted officials in key cities, reopened trade routes, and ensured that taxes and supplies flowed once more to the royal treasury. His leadership brought order back to a country that had nearly forgotten unity. Ahmose also turned his attention to the Nile Valley. Many towns had been destroyed by the war or abandoned during Hyksos raids. Canals were blocked, fields dried up, and irrigation systems had collapsed. Without water, Egypt could not survive, so Ahmose launched massive rebuilding projects. Workers cleared canals, repaired dams, and restored the ancient water networks that fed Egypt's farms. When the Nile flooded the following year, the fields came back to life, green and fertile, carrying the promise of prosperity. The temples were next. The Hyksos had damaged sacred places and disrupted traditional worship. To Egyptians, the temples were not just religious centers, they were the heart of their civilization. Ahmose ordered them to be rebuilt, repaired, and purified. Stone by stone, they rose again. Statues of the gods were restored, incense burned once more, and songs filled the halls. The people believed their gods had returned to bless Egypt after years of abandonment. Ahmose also honored his ancestors. He funded grand tombs and monuments for his family, including his mother, Queen Ahotep, a powerful figure who had kept Thebes steady during the darkest years. He recognized the sacrifices of both his parents and his brother, Ahmose, understanding that without them, his victory would never have been possible. Security remained a concern. Although the Hyksos were defeated, Ahmose knew Egypt must never again be vulnerable to foreign invasion. He strengthened Egypt's borders and built forts along strategic routes. He expanded the navy and sent forces south to Nubia, reclaiming territories lost during the war. These moves not only protected Egypt, but also restored valuable trade in gold, ivory, and precious stones. Trade flourished once more. Ships sailed along the Nile and across the Red Sea. Markets buzzed with activity. Artisans created pottery, jewelry, and weapons. Farmers harvested abundant crops thanks to restored irrigation. Prosperity returned, slowly but surely. But perhaps Ahmose's greatest achievement was restoring Egyptian identity. For years, Egyptians had lived under foreign customs and foreign rule. Now, with Ahmose as pharaoh, they rediscovered pride in their culture, their language, and their gods. They reconnected with the legacy of their ancestors, the builders of pyramids, the creators of writing, the guardians of the Nile. Ahmose became a symbol of Egypt's rebirth. He had defeated invaders, united a broken land, and rebuilt a civilization that had nearly fallen apart. Under his leadership, Egypt entered a new era, strong, wealthy, confident, and ambitious. This period would become known as the New Kingdom, the most powerful and glorious chapter in Egyptian history. It was the age of Thutmose, Hatshepsut, Amenhotep, Tutankhamun, and Ramesses the Great. But its foundation, its strength and stability, was built by Ahmose. The young prince who inherited a fractured kingdom had transformed Egypt into a rising empire, and his name would forever be remembered as the ruler who restored the two lands and awakened the spirit of Egypt. With Egypt reunified and the Hyksos driven from the land, Ahmose entered the most prosperous phase of his reign. The years of rebuilding had strengthened the kingdom, and now Egypt stood ready to rise higher than ever before. What began as a struggle for survival was transforming into a golden age, an age that would define the future of the new kingdom. The Nile Valley flourished under Ahmose's leadership. Repaired irrigation canals filled the fields with life. Farmers harvested wheat, barley, and flax in abundance. Orchard trees blossomed with figs, dates, and pomegranates. For the first time in decades, people lived without the constant fear of famine or conflict. Markets teemed with merchants selling fresh goods. The kingdom was full of movement, energy, and promise. As Egypt grew wealthier, Ahmose invested in monumental construction. He rebuilt temples destroyed during Hyksos' rule and expanded others to celebrate Egypt's renewed strength. At Karnak, he commissioned new halls, shrines, and sacred structures, laying the foundation for what would become one of the greatest temple complexes in the world. Stones were carved with scenes of victory, liberation, and devotion to the gods. The message was clear. Egypt had returned to its rightful place under the protection of the divine. Art and craftsmanship flourished as well. Sculptors carved statues of Ahmose with youthful strength and determined eyes. Goldsmiths created jewelry decorated with intricate designs. Potters formed elegant vessels and painted them with symbols of rebirth. Artists captured the triumph over the Hyksos and the rebirth of the kingdom in scenes that would inspire future generations. But Ahmose's ambitions did not end at home. He looked beyond Egypt's borders to lands that had once belonged to his ancestors. To the south, he marched into Nubia, restoring Egyptian control and securing valuable resources, especially gold. Nubia became one of the keys to Egypt's future wealth. Trade routes extended deeper into Africa, bringing ivory, ebony, exotic animals, and precious minerals into Egyptian hands. In the northeast, Ahmose strengthened Egypt's presence along the Mediterranean coast and the Sinai Peninsula. These regions had been unstable during the Hyksos occupation, but now they were secured by Egyptian garrisons. This protection ensured safe trade with the Levant and expanded Egypt's influence beyond its traditional borders. As Egypt grew stronger, so did Ahmose's authority. He reorganized the government, placing loyal officials in key positions to ensure stability. He rewarded soldiers and nobles who had fought bravely, giving them land and wealth. This created a new class of powerful leaders loyal to the pharaoh. The royal family's influence spread through marriage alliances and diplomatic ties across the region. Religion continued to play a central role in Ahmose's golden age. Priests led ceremonies honoring the gods for Egypt's renewal. People believed that Ahmose's victories were divinely guided. Festivals became grand celebrations, with music, dance, offerings, and processions that filled the streets. Egypt's faith, shaken during the years of foreign rule, was now stronger than ever. But perhaps the most important achievement of this period was confidence. Egyptians once again believed in their greatness. Children grew up hearing stories of Ahmose's victories. Families told tales of liberation, bravery, and resilience. Pride returned to the hearts of the people. Egypt felt alive again. Ahmose's golden age laid the groundwork for an empire that would shape ancient history. His successors Amenhotep, Thutmose, and Hatshepsut would build upon his foundation, reaching heights Egypt had never known before. But it was Ahmose who made it possible. He restored strength, wealth, and unity. He rebuilt temples, reclaimed territories, and renewed the spirit of Egypt. The young prince who had once inherited a broken kingdom now ruled a thriving, powerful nation. His legacy was carved in stone, written in temples, and remembered in the hearts of his people. Egypt had entered a new dawn, and Ahmose stood at the center of it. the founder of its greatness. As the years passed, Ahmose grew older, but his influence remained strong across Egypt. The kingdom he had rebuilt now stood proud and prosperous, its borders secure, its temples thriving, and its people united. The young warrior who once rode into battle had become a seasoned ruler, whose wisdom guided every corner of the land. In his final years, Ahmose focused not on war, but on stability. He understood that the strength of Egypt depended on what he left behind. The future pharaohs would inherit the world he shaped, and he wanted that world to be strong, peaceful, and prepared for greatness. He continued improving Egypt's infrastructure. Canals were expanded, new fields irrigated, and trade routes secured. Entire villages that had suffered during the Hyksos era were restored. Temples received new statues, altars, and sacred offerings. Ahmose believed that honoring the gods ensured the kingdom's long-term balance, and he devoted great attention to religious life. His royal court was a place of dignity and order. Ministers, generals, scribes, and priests worked together to maintain Egypt's newfound stability. Many of these officials had fought beside Ahmose during the war, and their loyalty remained unshaken. Together, they built systems that would sustain the new kingdom long after Ahmose's death. Ahmose's family also played an important role in his later years. His mother, Queen Ahotep, who had been a pillar of strength during the struggle against the Hyksos, was honored throughout Egypt. His wife, Queen Ahmose Nefertari, was deeply respected and known for her intelligence and leadership. She would later be worshipped as a goddess in her own right. Their partnership strengthened the royal family's presence and secured the future of the dynasty. Ahmose also guided his son, Amenhotep I, preparing him to rule. He taught him the lessons learned through hardship, the importance of unity, the danger of foreign threats, and the value of justice. Amenhotep watched his father's decisions closely and learned how to maintain balance in a diverse and growing empire. Under Ahmose's mentorship, he developed the wisdom required to inherit the throne. As Ahmose aged, he often reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the days of fear when the Hyksos controlled the north. He remembered the battles fought by his father and brother. He remembered standing on the battlefield as a young king, determined to finish what they had started. Those memories shaped him, strengthened him, and defined the man he had become. His final years were peaceful, marked by prosperity and confidence. Egypt was no longer a divided land struggling to survive. It was a rising empire, full of potential and pride. The new kingdom, the golden age of Egyptian power, was no longer a dream. It was reality. When Ahmose finally passed away, Egypt mourned deeply. People across the Nile Valley lit torches, sang prayers, and honored the pharaoh who had returned their land, their culture, and their identity. Priests carried his body to a royal tomb, prepared with care and respect, there, surrounded by symbols of victory and liberation. Ahmose was laid to rest as a hero and savior. His son, Amenhotep I, ascended the throne soon after, continuing the legacy his father had built. Under his rule, Egypt advanced even further. expanding its borders and strengthening its spiritual and cultural traditions. Everything Ahmose restored served as the foundation. For Egypt's future greatness, Ahmose's reign marked the beginning of the new kingdom, a period of extraordinary achievements. Kings like Thutmose III, Hatshepsut, and Ramesses the Great would follow in his footsteps, pushing Egypt to the height of its power. But behind their victories stood the legacy of the man who had fought to rebuild Egypt from the ashes. Ahmose's story reminds the world that true leadership is not just about winning battles. It is about restoring hope, rebuilding strength, and guiding a nation toward its destiny. He was the pharaoh who freed Egypt, the king who restored unity, the founder of the new kingdom, and his name would live on for thousands of years. Ahmose's story is more than the tale of a king. It is the story of a nation reborn. From the chaos of foreign rule, from the ashes of fallen cities, from the pain of losing his father and brother, Ahmose rose with courage far beyond his age. He carried the weight of Egypt's future on his shoulders and transformed a broken kingdom into a powerful, unified empire. His victory over the Hyksos ended nearly a century of foreign control. His leadership restored Egypt's dignity. His rebuilding efforts revived its farms, temples, and cities, and his vision laid the foundation for the new kingdom, the most glorious and influential era in ancient Egyptian history. For thousands of years, the names of the pharaohs who came after him would shine brightly: Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Ramesses the Great. Their monuments, temples, and achievements would echo across time, but none of it would have been possible without the young warrior who reclaimed Egypt's soul. Ahmose's legacy is carved not just in stone, but in the identity of a civilization. He proved that strength could rise from struggle. He proved that unity could follow despair. He proved that one leader, guided by duty and courage, could change the course of history. Today, Ahmose is remembered as the founder of the new kingdom, the savior of Egypt, the liberator of his people, and the pharaoh who brought light back to a land that had nearly fallen into darkness. This is the story of Ahmose I, the story of a prince who became a warrior who became a king, and a king who became a legend.